Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm reminded today, Emily, of traveling with my friend Pat Feely in Cape Dorset many years ago now, and we were there in the spring, and the day that we were there was a day like this, and the people in the community told us, oh, this is the day of 3 drips. And I said, what? You're in a very special day. The day of 3 drips is when when the snow is melting, and the snow, instead of melting with 1 drip and then a pause and then another drip, there's a day apparently in the calendar when, as the weather changes, there's 3 successive drips and then a pause. And that's the day when you know that spring is really coming. And it seems like today is, I mean, talk about specific observation of the natural world, which is a lot of what we're seeing in this beautiful show. But today seems like the day of 3 drips. It seems like a beautiful spring day, but also a very auspicious day to be opening this beautiful exhibition. We've also just received, we're able to make the announcement of our $25 million from the federal government to help us with our renewal of the McMichael. So we're very happy people for a lot of good reasons. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. The McMichael Canadian Art Collection is located on the territory of the Mississauga of the Credit, traditional lands of the Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, and Huron-Wendat people. And you can see clay pipes from the Huron-Wendat people. If you go down the ramps, just as you're getting back to the lobby, take a moment with those extraordinary pipes. There was a village of 3,000 people at Rutherford Road in the 400 in that region about 500 years ago. So we're very aware of the land we stand on and its deep histories. The McMichael is uniquely situated along the Carrying Place Trail, which provided an integral connection for Indigenous people between Ontario's lakeshore and the Lake Simcoe-Georgian Bay region. So my first thank you here has to be to the West Baffin Eskimo Co-op and to Dorset Fine Arts. And I don't know who from Dorset is here today, who's waving arms in the audience, but aha, there you are. Who entrusted us with this extraordinary collection all those years ago. 1990 is when it came into the holdings of the McMichael. We hold it in trust for that community, and it is a real treasure. It was, so I think both William Huffman and David Hannon are here today, and I want to thank you again so much for the trust that the West Baffin Eskimo Co-op placed in us. The decision to move the collection here came in the wake of a catastrophic fire at Baker Lake, which decimated their collection of drawings. And I believe one of their special guests here today was Phil Jevick, who was telling me, where are you, Phil? Who was telling me earlier today about, there he is in the second row, about a sort of a field trip of McMichael, various McMichael leadership figures. And Phil, I've seen photographs of this outing and it looked like they had a really, really good time. But the discussion came up, this was back in 1985, Phil pointed out that there'd been this fire. And what was the community of then Cape Dorset, as it was known, doing to protect the archive that he was aware was there? And so from this twinkle in the eye grew a kind of a bigger and bigger snowball as the ideas advanced, and we were lucky enough to welcome it in. The 2 women who were in charge of McMichael at that time, Barbara Tyler and Jean Blodgett, made an extraordinary decision to assume that responsibility, which came with considerable costs and commitments on the part of the institution. And they did so against some of you here today. I'm looking at you, Jamie Cameron. Remember when there was a considerable amount of bucking and snorting among the governance community about why we were taking on this burden, what some board members indecorously thought of as an obligation rather than an opportunity. And those ladies, Tyler and Blodgett, just muscled their way through all that and secured this collection for all time. And so I just want to, neither of them are still with us, but I want to remember them here today because they were so progressive and prescient in their thinking about what this museum could be. We also want to thank, of course, the sponsors that made it possible for us to bring such an incredible exhibition together, but also the book, which is on, if you hear the thunderous sound of the print machines in Winnipeg from here, you would know that our book is being created as we speak, literally, and will be here very soon. And I'm sure Jane Cathers and her team in the bookshop can take your name and order if you want to secure that publication today. And I know we'll be talking about it a little later on. But the people who helped us to get this whole thing up and Adam were Rand and Linda Lomas, very treasured members of our governance community, Terry West and Mark Defend from London, Ontario, who are dear friends of ours, and Power Corporation of Canada, who just seems to me, they have walked with us every step of the way here at the McMichael as we've created this transformation over the last 7 or 8 years. And they just seem to be showing up. Yeah, I'm not going to embarrass Paul Genet because he's not here today, but they seem to be showing up in so many good places. The decisions they're making are visionary, and we feel so honored to have them as our partners. Brett Cameron, Indigenous Art Curatorial Fund, Chris and Jamie are here in the front row. It kind of feels like there's no McMichael without you two. You've been so critical to our institution for so many years in various different governance capacities and also as donors and of lenders of your very fine collection and donors of your very fine collection. In this case, Chris Brett, I'm given to understand, was rather relentless. Many of you in the room today have felt the lash of his encouragement to donate to the McMichael. Thank you for doing so. And Chris, you just always fill our sails. It's you guys are just both amazing, amazing supporters of what we do. Peter Goring is also with us today here, and he too has helped us to do a lot of extraordinary things at the McMichael. This show is just one of many, and the Goring Family Foundation. So we thank you all. It is, there is no romance in a museum without finance. There is no way to do these great things that we do without people helping us. And it is a time of overall of corporate restraint in donations in a way that the museum sector has not seen for a long time. And also government restraint, let's use that word, in funding operations and exhibitions. So we are really grateful to the private individuals that are allowing us to spread our wings. Other people to thank today. I think some of the gang from Ed Bertinsky's Think to Thing are here today. We would not have been able to digitize 90,000 drawings had it not been for Ed Bertinsky's innovative machine, which has a rotating platform for photography of these drawings and allowed us to photograph thousands of drawings in a week rather than hundreds. It would have taken over 12 years to digitize this collection by conventional means. And we did it in what, Jen, about 6 months? Yeah. It was, we were the guinea pigs, and they were with this new machine with us, they were very patient with us, and we were most appreciative of all their efforts. There were bugs to work out, but we worked them out together. And I think we're all feeling immensely satisfied with what was accomplished there. So Omar Grant, Daniel Patterson, Anna Ferfaro in attendance today. Thank you so much for the relentless task of making this archive finally live out in the world. It's on our website. It's accessible in low bandwidth form as well in the north for all northern communities. This is a landmark project that has never been attempted before, and we actually got it done. Special thanks to Lisa Potty, our Chief Operations Officer, who got the ball rolling with digitization some 8 or 9 years ago, and then Jennifer Withrow, who's right here, who was the tireless and dogged enforcer who got us through to the final finishing line on this project. It was a truly epic undertaking. You'll notice a case in the exhibition of exquisite photographs of Inuit creators from Kinngait. Those photographs were taken by Norman Hallandy, and Norman's widow, Diana Cousins, is here today. And I'm just wondering if she would wave her hand. There she is right here. Okay. You'll find when you get the book, which I know you all will, that it is peopled by the most extraordinary full bleed black and white portraits of the people whose drawings you're enjoying in the book. And that humanity of those pictures, the sense of personality, character, and distinct liveliness of each individual subject brings a life and breath to the book, and indeed to the exhibition as well, if you look in that case, that we just simply would not have had without Norman's contribution. And we hold the Hallandy Archive here at the McMichael. It's a wonderful thing, and it's great to be able to use it in this fantastic way. So wherever Norman is, I'm hoping he's basking on his fluffy white cloud. I also want to thank Steve Cameron, Figure One. I think Steve is here with us today, who published the book, which is on its way to us, and we're going to be hearing more about the book later. Also in attendance, York University's Curating Circumpolar Indigenous Cultural Sovereignty lead, Anna Hudson, is here from York University. And they're actually helping us to create a symposium for the many Inuit writers and thought leaders who are gathered in our publication, but also additional people in the community that will be coming together here in April to talk with each other and have a real moment of learning and sharing here at the McMichael. We're so grateful for that. And also lenders to this show. Just quickly, Barry Appleton, who I don't think is with us today, but is always a source of extraordinary works. Chris Brett and Jamie Cameron, there they are again. Dorset Fine Arts, as I mentioned before, of course, the collection is the collection of the West Baffin Eskimo Co-op. We are merely their keepers. So Paul Desmarais and Mary Daly Desmarais, who parted with their truly extraordinary Juvenile Ashoona of the community of Dorset with the giant serpent in it that you will see in the gallery there. And the actress Martha Burns and Paul Gross, who are devoted collectors of Inuit art and who lent us this fantastic drawing of Hans drawing that you see when you come into Gallery 9. So that's all the wonderful people who brought this project up to this point and made it possible for us to do this. But there's two very special people you're going to meet today, and then I'm going to sit down, which is going to feel great. One is John Gagan, just to my left here. John is Associate Curator, Collections and Research at the McMichael Canadian Art Collection. And prior to joining the McMichael in 2022, he worked as Senior Editor of the Inuit Art Quarterly. He's published on various topics of historical and contemporary Canadian art, including such artists as Gathy Falk, William Karelic, Elizabeth Ashulatak, Mary Rinch, and Kent Monkman. And John holds an MA in Art History with Curatorial Practice Diploma from York University. And then there's Emily. Emily Laurent Henderson, this is your big day, one of your many big days to come. Emily is an Inuk curator, arts writer, and poet, and a very good one, with a practice rooted in Indigenous creative sovereignty. Henderson was the first full-time Inuk editor at the legacy publication, the Inuit Art Quarterly, and in 2019, so these two have known each other for a while, and in 2019 co-led a special issue of the magazine that focused on the Inuit artist collective Isuma, who represented Canada in the 58th Venice Biennial in the same year. A former member of the Indigenous and Canadian Art Curatorial team at the Art Gallery of Ontario, her articles and commentary have been featured in the Inuit Art Quarterly, Inuktitut Magazine, Sea Magazine, Azure, Studio Magazine, and other national titles. In 2024, her book of poetry, Hold Steady My Vision, you can see she has no problem doing that when you go through the show, was published by the Print Studio Guelph. And Emily, we got to know Emily here, and I think you'll probably talk about this in your talk, but when we invited her to write about one of Kenojuak's drawings that was in our early days exhibition, which will be coming back to our platform in October after the summer. And she wrote such a captivating piece of writing that we all just fell in love with her voice, and we began talking with Emily about joining our team and being the person who would swim into this archive and guide us and figure out how to make an exhibition that would do this justice, and also help us to guide this institution into a better and better place with reconciliation with Indigenous peoples across the country. So Emily has taken all of these tasks on with all of her heart and soul. She's created something truly extraordinary here with this exhibition at McMichael. We are all of us in the curatorial team are so happy to have been able to support you and encourage you along the way. You've done something truly fine, and we're all so proud. Anyway, at the risk of making us all weep, I will ask Emily and John to come and join me on stage. I'm going to move your chairs a little closer together because I feel like they're too far apart. Sorry. I'm a bit fastidious this way, but just give me 1 minute and come and join me, and we'll bring you closer together. Oh, for the cameras. I'm told they split them apart for the cameras, so I will not be rearranging the furniture as planned. But anyway, thank you all for your attention, and enjoy this beautiful, beautiful afternoon with these two wonderful young people.
Now that I'm sobbing.
Good afternoon, and welcome, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with Emily, who I've known for quite a few years now, and I feel like I've had the privilege of being in the front seat as you've undertaken this incredible project. I was there with you the first day that you got to visit the archive, and have been along the way on every Zoom meeting and every time that we've gone to look at drawings, and in this last week, which has been absolutely incredible. So I'm very grateful to be here and to hear from you again and kind of understand even deeper this really remarkable project. So welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Yeah.
Great. And so Sarah has already touched on a little bit about this archive and its breadth of some 90,000 drawings that date all the way from the late 1950s through the early 1990s. And I wonder if you could kind of just talk about what this means and what is special and unique about this particular archive and the artists behind it.
Yeah. So 90,000 drawings. Woohoo! Let's just have a moment for 90,000 digitized drawings. This is something I really had the torch passed to me on this. This is the way I describe this project and this work is it's intergenerational, it's multi-generational. There's, of course, so many creatives and people that came before me, such as the artists that are present in the archive, and the staff and the leadership of the McMichael from generations prior and from years prior that have stewarded this and made good on the promise that we made to have this digitized and freely and publicly available. And I came in right at the very end of that digitization project. So I started with the McMichael with the intent of this being the first project that I'd be doing here, and that was November of 2023. But of course, John and I go way back, and it's really quite daunting to sit down and thinking about I was doing some math about this. It's just like, okay, how many drawings am I going to have to look at each day, each month? I remember at some point I'm like, okay, if the average size of this drawing is 50 centimeters across, then that's enough drawings laid end to end to cross Dorset Island 7 times. So we're talking about work in a almost massive geographical scale. This is really representative of a huge intellectual and creative output from a community of people that has one of the highest concentrations of working artists the world over. So I think approaching it was very humbling. And I think, though, something I write about in the book that I'm so excited to share with you all is this archive does make perpetual students of us, and there's a million ways that we could do a show like this, and there's a million different ways that we can interpret this archive, and it's constantly showing us that we still have so much to learn, even those of us like myself and many people in this room who have spent our lives steeped in Inuit art and Inuit culture and a deep love for it, and so I think that's the groundwork and it's very, digitization made this possible. I couldn't imagine having to go through this one at a time. Although we were saying earlier, Jamie and I were talking about how much fun that would be to go through these one at a time by hand, but it would be many, many years. Yeah.
So here we have a photograph of Jean Blodgett and Barbara Tyler, who Sarah mentioned earlier, some of the women who are responsible for the archive being here in Kleinburg. In Kenojuak Ashevak, one of the star figures in the archive. So just to touch upon this briefly and the kind of somewhat harrowing idea of bringing 90,000 drawings from a very small community in the Arctic all the way here. And so these are some of the kind of great photos that we have in our archive of documenting this process. And since the archive arrived here in the early 1990s, there have been various engagements with the archive, and some of you who are longtime McMichael members or friends of the gallery will have remembered some of these amazing exhibitions and catalogs from the 1990s, many of which were led by Jean Blodgett and Susan Gustavusson, very important art historians who dug into this archive long before it was digitized. They had, we just, I think, wanted to acknowledge how helpful and important these early projects were. And
yeah, it's there's just so many people that have come into creating and then loving and stewarding this archive.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And many of the themes that they touch upon, I think you've taken and really run with in a beautiful way as well.
Yeah, I think even like we've got a moment in the first gallery as you're entering that has all those wonderful, like I focus a lot on human stories in this show. But we do have a moment for just like the strange and wonderful works that would have been centerpiece in something like Strange Scenes in 1993.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we've talked about in preparing for this exhibition and just throughout our friendship and working relationship is kind of Inuit drawing and Inuit graphic tradition in general. And I think while we want to really celebrate the work that was done in Kinngait, it also is part of a larger story of a graphic tradition. And this was an image that you wanted to talk about, and I'm very happy to have it here for everyone to see.
So this is the image that changed the way that I think about Inuit graphic tradition and art, and works on paper, works on canvas. So has anybody here heard of John Sackhouse? I also hadn't heard of John Sackhouse until I spent time in the UK in 2019. John Sackhouse, I don't actually know what his real name was. I don't know what his name was when he at birth, but I do know that he was a young Greenlandic man that snuck on board a whaling vessel and ended up in Scotland and London. And while he was there, he studied art. And so this is work from, I believe this is dated 1816. This is an engraving based off of a work done by a Greenlandic artist, by an Inuit artist. And so for me, like when I think about Inuit graphic art, this is my, or works on paper, and I guess maybe in canvas, this is my starting point. Because I remember that, because oftentimes I think when we think about Inuit art and graphic work and work on paper, it sort of begins in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. But there's examples that go much, much earlier. Even if we think about Peter Pitseolak's sketchbooks from the 1930s, this is something that's pre-existing, and this is one work that blows my mind. And it's a theme that I touch on in the exhibition as well, as this concept of people recording their encounters that they're having as their world is getting bigger, and they're meeting folks from different places that are arriving on their shores. So there's that, and then we've got this other starting point where we think about Inuit graphic art, and I wouldn't even think this is a starting point. This is an always has been. This is an always has been. Inuit have always had a graphic tradition that long predates printmaking or works on paper. But we can see some of the ways that the graphic tradition that we've come to know and love from prints and drawings, and the way that they have their roots in works with textile and leather and skins. And so these are two works that we have on display right now on loan from private collection. These were works by the Queen Kenojuak herself, and these are very, very special. The white leather that makes up sort of the bulk of the body of the bag is sealskin. It's shaved and bleached sealskin. But we had a look under the microscope, or our conservator had a look under the microscope, and the dark leather that forms the detail is actually bovine. It's cow. So there's a few different places this could have been made. This were mid-1950s, and during the mid-1950s, Kenojuak Ashevak is based in Parks of Art Hospital in Quebec City. She has contracted tuberculosis, and she's there during a prolonged stay. And at this time, there's crafting programs where not artists, they could be artists, where patients that are there for prolonged periods of time it's hard to make a living. You might have to support yourself or your family still. There's craft programs that are set up where patients can be creating work and selling them to make a little bit of extra money. So I wonder if this is where those bags are from, if they were actually made in Quebec City, especially because the bovine leather was incorporated, and it was probably easier to get sealskin back then in the South before we had bans. So there's that, and then it also connects to another famous bag of hers that is a little bit lost to history, which is the bag of rabbit eating seaweed, which is famously Ashevak's very first print from 1958. And that was, I think, James Houston saw her. There's that story in his memoirs where he sees her walking along the beach with this beautiful graphic applique on her sealskin bag, and thinks, well, that would make a really beautiful print. But that bag is lost to art history. So if anyone has any leads, come see me after. But yeah, and we're really lucky to have these on display. There's some interesting content too. We've got these two female figures here that seem to be tending to a garden. And there's gardening implements, which also further makes me suspicious if this was something that was being produced in the South. But yeah, these are really extraordinary works from Inuit art history.
And these works by Kenojuak, you can kind of see the continuity of how she moved so elegantly from working with skin to working with graphite. This is a very early work, and this was a work that you wrote about for early days. And I was you can't really see it here, but one of the things that I loved was, I had been living and working with this drawing at the gallery for some time. And when I came in with you for the first time, you had immediately noticed, you can't really see it here, but that there's an eraser mark where Kenojuak had the leg that's tucked under the figure in the center, which we kind of interpret as a self-portrait of the artist, but that she had moved it, that it had been erased, a pentimenti, if you will. And I had not noticed this before, and so that was kind of clued me in immediately as to the insights that you might have into this drawing, but also the intentionality that Kenojuak had in making this, and that the composition wasn't working, and that she thought it out. We think about later with Kenojuak, whose so many of her drawings are freehand, and she's really just coming into her element here, and I loved that, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about writing about this and encountering those drawings for the first time.
That's the beautiful thing about the archive, is it's unmediated and it's not curated. So when we think about an institutional collection, there's a lot of different levels that the work goes through when we're building a collection. But an archive, it's just what people were making, and then it was getting stored, and some of it became prints and some of it didn't. But sometimes you can really see entire career trajectories recorded in the archive, which is really, really special. You also can see thought process happening in a way that you can't always see when you've got a final print or a final product and it goes up on the wall. And one of the first things I noticed that I found very warm about the archive when I was working with it for the very first time in November 2022, like even before I was working here at the McMichael, was coffee rings and cigarette burns and places where things had been drawn and then rubbed out. Drawing is so immediate. There's so much that, and there's the reason that I call this show Worlds on Paper. First of all, it's a play on words, and I love that. Secondly, it really is about people translating out their worlds in a very immediate sort of way onto paper. And so that's what I found so charming about the foot that had been drawn and then erased. Is just like, it was her hand that really, that's the beautiful thing about drawing or painting. It's just like, I always used to do that, get really close to paintings and galleries. It's just like, wow, their hands really had to like make every brush stroke. It's different from seeing it in a book. You're so close to the artist's hand. And that, I think that early sort of thinking about the archive informed the rest of the work I did about it, which is just like this feeling of closeness to the artist, even though we're separated by generations and by time, and wanting to bring that same feeling of closeness to the artist through the show by works about their lives. And and their observations, and then of course the amazing Norman Tallendy archive photographs that we have that directly depict the artists.
So this is another work that we encountered on that first day that you visited the archive in November 2022, and that is in the show.
Yep.
And I think it also speaks to one of the larger themes of the exhibition. You wrote about that in your essay for Early Days, and it's also picked up on here. I wonder if you could kind of walk us through the next few slides.
Yeah. Kenojuak Ashevak is a really important first generation artist. First generation, I say first generation artist, it's like first generation that's working at the studios at the co-op. And she's credited with the iconic Quebec chop mark. So she has her career was very short because I think she passed on in 1961, but she did leave an indelible mark. And one of those marks that she left was pot spirits, which is a drawing, and this is a print, and this is the original drawing for print, and the page is full, but when we get to the print, there's 3 figures that have been extrapolated, and one of the figures has been repeated and made small, and they're both charming. There's a lot of you see them next to each other. There's a lot of they're both strong in their own ways. But when I was writing about this for Early Days, that was when I started thinking about the editorial process that's at play here, right? And this is the art reality. There's an editorial process, and sometimes determining. So we've got this 90,000. We're talking about a 90,000 drawing archive, and between the time period that's covered by this archive from 1959 to 1990. Out of this 90,000 works, about just over 2,000 of them are actually made into prints. So there's this whole dearth of the unseen, things that don't make it to market. And at this time, drawing was conceptualized a little bit more as a step in the printmaking process rather than a medium unto itself. That's, of course, changed. But the editorial process, like sometimes that could be just logistical, what it was going to work in carving into a lithostone, what's going to fit and feel good, and then it's also, well, what's going to be marketable, what's going to perform well, what's going to sell, and so there's a series of formal and informal processes that eventually lead to this huge narrowing down to what actually makes it to market. And so this is one of the examples where we see this really clearly. And a really funny story about this work. This is one of the works I saw when I came in November 2022. And then by July 2023, when I came to see the works as they were being digitized, it just so happened that out of 90,000 drawings, that day that I went there was a box open with this work on top, ready to be digitized. And I don't know how to calculate odds, but I assumed they would be astronomical.
Absolutely. And it was like not even the day that you were there, like the 45 minutes that we were in the building that this was in the box was pretty astounding.
Yeah. So take that as a sign, I guess.
And so although the publication for Worlds on Paper is not yet ready, for those interested to read about Emily's first encounter with these drawings, Early Days, Indigenous Art from the McMichael is available in the gift shop, and Emily's beautiful essay is presented there. And as you talk about that afternoon at the Think to Things studio, this is the machine that digitized all of these works. So just to kind of share with everyone here how that worked, it's essentially like a large rotating lazy Susan that never stops moving. And so one drawing is placed on and somebody working on the other side is taking them off. And so they have an incredible efficiency in putting all of those drawings on, and it happened in 6 months. It almost miraculously, all of the drawings were digitized and then uploaded to this website, which you became very familiar with, Kinngait Drawings, which I believe translates to a place for family, which was named by members from the community. And from here, you can search by different artists and some different sub-themes. And this is the kind of page that you get. And I wonder if you could talk us through a little bit your experience of looking through these drawings and the kind of your first contact with so many of these works.
Oh, yeah. I started closing my eyes at night and seeing this. So yeah, it's something that I don't think, like, it could be done. It can be done. It would be we wouldn't be like sitting here on March 9th, 2025, having this conversation. We might be having this conversation March 9th, 2028. And I think, not to say, I think there's also a beauty to slow curation. But the term we've been using is unprecedented curatorial access. So I'm able to see things in a macro way much more quickly than I would going through the work one by one. So first contact with this, when we're building an exhibition, you start by building your checklist and your long list. And at first I was just saving things where it's just like, okay, texture, color, saved by artist, how do you sit down and begin to narrow down 90,000 works on paper? I didn't have anyone that I knew that I could ask how to do this. So you just kind of have to figure it out as you go. But at some point I noticed there was a pattern in what I was saving and why I was saving it. And that was artists that were depicting things from either their own lives or from their own memories or from life around them. So my academic background is I'm actually got a BA anthropology, and I'm really fascinated in social sciences and why we do what we do. I love people. And the anthropologist in me is like, wait a second. If we have a community here that has up to 25% of the adult population are working artists, and they're making art between 1959 to 1990, which is one of the most periods of most extreme change that could be happening in this time and space, that is like unmatched primary source material for what people are experiencing in real time. And so I started pulling things, people talk about home life and gathering, their encounters with presences in what would become known of like police and clergy, the way that more forms of transportation are emerging, and just trying to really showcase like Inuit ingenuity and adaptability and engineering and resilience, because I'm always amazed by Inuit. I will always go extremely hard for Inuit because we're a global population of like 160,000, population in Canada, maybe 55,000. And it's just, but we're still renowned the world over for everyone knows what a kayak is. Everybody has, how many people have heard about Enchanted Owl? And so just trying to it was also very daunting, trying to honor these artists that are included in the show, especially when I am separated from them by time and space. But yeah, that really became the centerpiece, was just trying to understand the story of this community through people that were there as it was happening.
And this has kind of come to be one of the key works, I think, in the show, and it holds so much of your curatorial approach to the project. I wonder, just as we kind of dive in deeper to the show and the themes and specific works, if we might not start here, which is a funny place to start because it is indeed the last work you see in the show. But I think it's an important place because it holds so much.
Yeah, we have this figure here. This is by Kinngait Drawings, who is a fantastic artist, and I had such a hard time narrowing down works by her in particular because she does so much great work that was about the community, and she did it all in this very dreamlike, beautiful way. But you could also see, as she sort of, this is it says no date, but I'm going to say probably like 70s or 80s. So Kinngait at this point is a very different world from when she'd been born in 1915. And we've got this guy, and he's holding on, like pulling the two power cords on the building. But the way I see it, like the way I've been looking at this for months, and the reason that we've been using it so much in material and to talk about the show, is I always feel like it's like scales a little bit, like you're holding two different things in your hands. And I was very cautious, and I've talked about this before. I don't want to create binaries, and I think there's sometimes this binary that gets talked about in Inuit history. It's just like, oh, when they were on the land or when we came off the land. It's just like, okay, well, you don't, nobody comes off the land. The land is there. You're just on it in a different way. Or then and now, or the one that I take most issue with, like traditional or versus modern. I'm not trying to do that. I want to just show, I want to acknowledge that, the amount of change that happens between 1959 and 1990, but then also the way, like in one hand, there's like huge change. It's just like, how do you adapt? It's just like new languages, new spiritual systems, new government systems, new ways of living, new economies. The Inuit art market is effectively really the basis and structure of a new economy. And while at the same time, so much survives and is passed down and is transferred from generation to generation. And so that is the way that I hold this work very near and dear to my heart. And that's the way I've been looking at it. And also it's just a beautiful, the color is bold and brilliant, and it takes up a whole page, more or less. So that's my take.
You said something very beautiful earlier about the mark making when you were talking about Kenojuak and the difference of seeing works in person than seeing them digitally or in a book. And I think for me, one of my favorite mark makers ever really is Par. I was looking at one of the drawings today, what we see on the right, which is a letter, it's Par's name in Inuktitut. I was looking at one of the drawings today, and it's made up of like probably 50 different marks. Like he's not even just writing his name, he's drawing his name. And I love how filled his drawings are. And you give a really beautiful moment to Par at the beginning of the show. And I'm so grateful because he's one of my favorite artists. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Par and what you love about these drawings.
Yeah, so we do have a great Par moment. And if you go back to the very beginning with the graphite, we've got, like, that whole room is mostly all graphite, with the exception, there's one drawing in like the making art section, which I think has felt tip pen, and then there's a pair of great like red bottom boots that's in one of Par's works. So Par, I was talking a little bit about Par this morning. I'm sure many of you know the story of Par if you know the stories from Inuit art. He doesn't really start making work until the last 8 years of his life. He's been a hunter all his life. In that way, he's very similar to more contemporary examples like Tim Pitseolak. And he makes a lot of work about hunting. So he goes from being a hunter to, he's elderly, and he's moved into permanent settlement at Kinngait, which was then called Cape Dorset. And he just is off to the races. He's making thousands of works on paper, both drawings and prints. And to me, I always just envision him just like pouring out memories of his life as a hunter onto these works that depict seal and dogs and families and hunters. And that's kind of why I have him placed very early on in the exhibition when you see him as you come in, because it's just like, when I think of someone who's translating their world out onto paper, I think about Par, because he did it with such fervor, and he did it so rapidly, and did it in a way that I think is so valuable to current and future generations of Inuit, by preserving so much of his own memory that way. So yeah, tremendous amount of respect.
Yeah,
for
and
Par.
for someone who had been born in 1893
Yes,
and then
yeah.
making drawings well into their 70s, it's just always been such a fascination for me with Par.
Yeah.
And that he almost took art making like it was a job, like providing for his community through hunting, translated into like recording his stories for the community. And I think that is a really special part of this project. Another one of the artists who kind of gets highlighted throughout the show, but also in the graphite room, is Peter Pitseolak. And I know we both have a lot of love for the drawings that he made.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Peter Pitseolak is he is repeated over and over throughout the show. And so, like, again, one of the things that I'm thinking about, people translating their world out onto paper, who is doing that with like Peter Pitseolak. And so Peter Pitseolak, he's a graphic artist, he's making drawings, but he's a writer, he's writing things down, and then he's a photographer. So he is the first Indigenous photographer in the Baffin Island region during this time. And one of these works, this is early 1960s, and it was just so different from, it felt so contemporary. It felt like something what one of my friends might draw. She's just cheeky and kind of peering out, and I wonder too, like we've talked about this work quite a bit, you and I, if and influences later on for artists and photography, but because he was already producing works, him and his wife were producing photos, and they have their own darkroom set up. I always wonder if this is a work from a photo. And she's paired with 4 other drawings with women with the same facial markings. So I don't know if this is the same person depicted over and over again, or if it's the same figure or the same character. But yeah, that's another thing too. I'll get a little bit into the importance, like also again during this period of time, traditional tattooing practices are, if not outright banned, they're definitely deeply discouraged by the federal government and by the church. So that's a practice that starts to go to sleep for a while, but it does live on in the drawings that are being produced during this era. You'll see tattoos over and over and over again throughout the exhibition. And I think that's also just such an important way that practice, even when it was being suppressed, was also still being preserved in work that was being created at this time by Inuit artists.
Yeah, and as we talk about, the graphic tradition in Inuit art coming about, like I think tattooing is such a vital part of that, and the drawings are really a continuation of that. And just to speak really quickly about the photography here, as someone who kind of came into this project knowing more about maybe contemporary drawings from Kinngait and artists like It Pootoogook and others who are Tim Pitseolak, who are known for having used photography in their practice, and that really starting in the 90s and 2000s. To think about somebody doing that maybe 50 years beforehand is really exciting for me, and is and kind of lifting back the veil on what else we don't know about the legacies. And that's something that I'm really excited about. And there are kind of 2 distinct exhibitions that we're going to talk about today, and just the kind of continuity between that, and giving credit to the artists who were really trailblazing, but have the works have not been seen, or they've not been credited in that way. It's really cool. So we've got some more of these really fantastic works. I'm going to move through a few of these that you've already talked about a little bit, and their relation to strange scenes.
You see that sweet skin bag?
And then another section in this first room that I love is the section about art making. And I wonder if you could touch on that briefly. This one, a woman exchanging a drawing for maybe money, or maybe the guy just has a mitt in his hand and he's admiring it.
Yeah, I think that I think it might be a little mitt moment. Yeah, so in the early graphite works, we do have a moment that is devoted to artists either drawing themselves drawing their community members thinking about drawing. And this was really exciting to me, and I kept pulling work after work after work where this was happening, because the early 60s, we're in the really early days of the graphic program in Kinngait, and I don't think we have a slide. We don't have the women at work one. No, that's okay. There's a work in the exhibition by Kenojuak Pootoogook. It's called Women at Work. And to me, like, that really encapsulated so much of the thinking that I had around these works that were about making art. Because we see women, we've got the woman in one corner, they're minding the children, they're doing the child rearing. Then there is where their skins are halfway through being stretched. And then there's also a point where there's women sitting on the ground and they're making art, they're making works on paper. So this is really early, and this is early on, but that work to me is just, it shows the way that this had already become a part of the cultural life as well as the economic life, and the day-to-day activities that sustained life. That help provide for oneself and one's family, and we get to see that really early on. And the fact that we see it as frequently as we do early in the archive is interesting to me. Just these people reflecting on the process of art making and the experiences that they were having with it at that time is, I think, very precious and valuable to be able to see. And there were so many works that unfortunately were left behind on the cutting room floor. I would have loved to put all 90,000 works in this exhibition, but I'm not a magician.
Maybe next time. But that in less than 10 years after drawing is introduced, it's already appearing in such a large volume. So fascinating.
Yeah.
Another wonderful section of this show is showing portraits. I wonder if you could talk about, and it is kind of one of the grand moments in the show. I wonder if you could talk about why that was important to encounter so many portraits.
Yeah. I was gripped with like a fervor, maybe like 2 weeks ago, where I was like, I want to call it ancestors, because it really is this sense of like, oh, you're sitting in this room of these people. They've literally photographed on the table case, or these faces on the wall that are it really is like sitting with, if not your direct ancestors, but the art ancestors. And I'm like, I hope when Inuit see this show, there is a sense of connectivity, especially Inuit that hail from Kinngait or have family connections from Kinngait. And that's the reason that the database is called Iningait Ilagi, the place for family, because so many people were recognizing their own relatives in the archive. And that was another thing. I'm an anthropologist. I'm not an anthropologist. I have an anthropology background, but I'm very compelled by human beings and human faces. And it was something that if we think about printmaking from this time, like there's not print runs of what I would consider to be portraiture or depictions of human faces. And so we have like a good mix of works in there that are both figurative and then a little bit more stylized, that show different kinds of ways that people were, and so many different kinds of style too, because I think I've had people tell me before, it's like, oh, well, there is like a Dorset style or an Inuit style, and oh, I love them. But it's I think this is one of the places where you really do get to see the way that people have such distinctive practices. And we've got this nice husband and wife moment here. Pauda and Pitalusi were married. And then I'm so biased about this work here on the right, because the top knot style is, so my family is Greenlanders, and I'm like, oh, she's like clearly a Greenlandic lady, like. So she's got to go in the show. And then these fabulous markings that I also couldn't leave behind. They had to go on the show. Really, really interesting graphic style.
So this section of the show, I think, is about gathering and being at home and home both before settlement in Kinngait and then after. We've got lots of beautiful family moments. This is a true favorite, I think, as well.
This is also a section, this was originally where I wanted to put this is the section that I wanted to be where the portraits are, because I was just like, because I do want it to be, I wanted it to feel like that second gallery there that has the portraits and it has the at home and the gathering. I wanted it to feel very domestic and kind of cozy. I'm really glad it was the right choice to have the portraits sort of be the beating heart of the show. Domestic space and the warmth of family connection too is also in many ways, I think, very just like, I don't know, we should go through some time and count how many babies there are in the hoods. There's a lot of babies in this show. I think, yeah, it was just really important to me to show and this, she's just so great. This is also like in the at-home section that we have in Gallery 11, and we've got, a little slice of life. There's a kitchen table and these sweet cowboy boots and the jeans tucked into them.
I'm so in love with many of these drawings, but I wonder if we can just move really quickly through some of these, because I've noticed our time, and there's so much to talk about. So we moved into another section here.
Gathering.
Yeah. About music, which is really beautiful. I think it comes across quite joyfully.
Yes. And look at those teeth too. Those are some healthy teeth. Again, this is Peter Pitseolak, and this is hung with a few other works that are very similar in theme and sort of seem to be maybe from the same day or same thought process. And we've got this accordion here in the back. And of course, accordion, that's something that came to the north with Scottish whalers and has become such an important part of Inuit musical tradition across the Arctic and jigs. And I feel, just having these sort of, I don't really know where this is or what's happening here, but looking like a large winter house or probably a kaigik, like a gathering place. Yeah, they're having a good time. Yeah.
And so speaking of the whalers, we also have this fantastic section called Encounters that looks at encounters with people. So
Yeah.
here, whalers, but other works like this.
Yeah. Yeah. That was another thing that kept coming up as well was I think during this time period, things that were popular in the market, this did become a print. This did hit the market. But a lot of the times things were more scenes of like wildlife or traditional hunting scenes or maybe like shamanism or scenes of transformation, which is still, of course, I'm not creating binaries. It's still a huge part of Inuit life. But then there was also all these other sort of cultural change that's happening, right? This is, you and I had a colleague once that talked about being in Igloolik in the 1970s and wearing like bell bottoms, right? Like people are creating a lot of work from popular culture, and then also making work that responds to the way that popular culture is looking at them. And this is one such great example of this. This is a drawing for print called The First Tourist. And you see the way that this man is like positioning this Inokomen into the frame. And it's just kind of everything that I think there's like an image in the South that is created in the hearts and minds of many of what the North is looking like at this time. And it would probably be like an Inukshuk, a woman in caribou clothes and holding the seal pelt. And right, and it's just like, this is his memento, and this is the narrative that's created through this lens, literally. And so there's, Kananginak Pootoogook, we know and love him for his scenes of wildlife and birds, but as you'll see through this exhibition, he's also a very keen, he makes a lot of really keen social commentary during this era.
Yeah, this is another great moment for Kanangana, and
Yeah.
for brevity, I will walk you through here, but
Yeah.
what we see is a man trading on the left-hand side when you think he's going to trade for a gun, but what he is really after is the record player in the background. And I thought that was so brilliant when you found this, Emily,
Yeah.
because I don't even know if these drawings were in the same box.
No.
But there is clearly a narrative here. It's the same man, it's the same thing, and I just love that you were able to kind of piece these parts of the story together.
Yeah. He's having such a good time, too.
We've got a big run for Kananginak because
Kananginak.
there's also a kind of a theme around Christianity and
Yeah.
Christian spirituality that comes through in this room as well.
And actually, this is something that Jean Blodgett was thinking about in the 80s. She has a 1984 or 1986 article called Christianity and Inuit Art, and I quote it in the book. Because Jean was also engaging in this archive and coming across the same surprising things that I came across, which is there's a lot of Christian art in this archive. This is something that when you think about huge cultural changes and shifts, this is one of the most, I think, substantial and has made the biggest impact. And I also wanted to treat this with a lot of respect because on one hand, it's just like we talk about it as a tool of colonization, but at the same time, this is now, many Inuit especially, this is their faith, and making room for that. Obviously, a lot of the artists that are creating Christian art, I think Pudlo Pudlat in particular, are creating it as Christians, but this isn't something that's necessarily as popular on the market. It's not very often hitting the market, but it's still showing up again and again and again in the archive, which I think is really indicative of what people are experiencing in terms of their spiritual experiences and the way that is moving in such a way in this time, and doing it in a way that is like, it's Christian iconography, but it's Inuit. It's it comes from a very particular aesthetic that is quite special. But yeah, I think in some ways it's just acknowledging that this is a huge spiritual disruption, and then but there's so much we can learn about it from the archive and from people's firsthand experiences, which is quite interesting. This one actually became my favorite in the whole archive. We've got the old spelling of Kyuga's name there. This became my favorite drawing in that room that is about encounters, or maybe second favorite after the Sami. But this we had translated recently, The Thought Bubble, and it says, when I was a child, I used to think that I would grasp my mother's amauti when she started rising to heaven. And to me, that just struck me in the heart. It became very touching because at first it's quite almost frightening or menacing. You don't know what's happening. We've got this little devilly character in the bottom right-hand corner here, but it's actually very touching. The story, I think it sort of, a love between a son and his mom, and perhaps grieving, processing grief. And this is maybe, so I think some of the works in this archive are maybe not even necessarily works that artists were ever intending to ever become prints. They could just be, there's a lot where people are making what they want, or they're making things that are very, very personal, like this. Yeah.
I think about this drawing too, especially with the fantastic works by Kenojuak Ashevak. Like, this is her father making this work, right? And so when we think about Kenojuak kind of, and her work being so original and unique, I actually think that it's more of a, like, in a trajectory of work like this. I think she's, standing on the shoulders of her father, who had made work like this, and that is grappling with very difficult ideas and tender ideas, and using really fantastical imagery to do that.
And just wait till you read John's essay about this in the book. He spells it out so clearly, and it's such a fantastic way. And then this too. This is maybe my favorite room. So who knows what we're looking at? I asked this earlier. Do people know who this is? Yeah, this is Sami. So Sami are the indigenous circumpolar people that live in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and few in Russia. And they are traditionally reindeer herders. And this is their traditional dress. This is their regalia. So this was another one of like show-stopping moments when I was going through the archive that stopped me in my tracks, because I was just like, oh, hang on. If I didn't know what Sami regalia looked like, I would have probably flipped right past this. But this is actually a really interesting record of history here. So in the 1920s, federal government is doing as they do, and they're just like, we would like Inuit to become herders and have a more consistent food supply. And so there's a group of Sami reindeer herders that come over on the Naskapi. And if you're familiar with the North, you probably know about the Naskapi. And they come over with herds of reindeer and Sami reindeer herding dogs, which are very cute, stocky little animals. And the idea is to basically transplant these Sami reindeer into Baffin Island, because the idea is that reindeer and caribou are really not so different at all. But the environment is extremely different between these are Sami people from Norway. The environment in Norway, even in the tundra, is very different from Baffin Island. And ultimately, this was not a species that could thrive, and the program was not a success. But it did become this really interesting moment of circumpolar indigenous people encountering each other, and that Peter Pitseolak here is either recording, as he knew this to have happened, or he could be possibly recording his own memory. This is now 40 years later. This is 40 years after the fact. So he would have been a young man in his early 20s when this would have happened.
So I'm conscious of time, and there's a lot still to talk about. So I think we could move kind of quickly through these next few sections. This one about fantastic machines.
Yes, machines, transport. I was saying this this morning when I was touring some folks. I have this room that's just dedicated to machines. This might just be because my dad was a former merchant marine, and he was into ships and planes, and there were always ships and planes, magazines and books all over my house. And at this time too, if we're thinking about changes that are happening in the Arctic in the latter half of the 20th century, transport is one of those things that is really changing. You're going from dog teams to ski-doos, and then suddenly ships and airplanes become, a really important aspect. And that's both that's cargo, and that's also, there's suddenly becoming a huge military presence in the Arctic, which I could get into in a whole other lecture, but I'm not going to do that. But artists like Pudlo Pudlat are picking up on this, and they're taking this change in the way that we get around, in the way that people get from the north to the south, or the way that people get from community to community, and he's translating it out into these really beautiful drawings that bring in Arctic wildlife. Like this, I think, was our cover photo for this talk, was this a wonderful goose plane that's happening here. So I do we do have a Pudlo moment for sure. And then more Peter Pitseolak. But and then Havavo Manomi is actually one of the last living artists that's represented in this archive. If you have the opportunity, this work is accompanied by an extended label that explains this work in his own words. So I would really encourage checking that out. We were actually able to talk to Havavo about some of this, which was really quite special. Yeah, and then we get into community change, the way that structures and environment have changed and continue to change. And Nicole Luke, who's one of, if not the first Inuit architect in Canada, wrote a really great essay for the book, mostly focusing on Kinngait Drawings, but about the way that Inuit are capturing structures and the way that structures, prefabricated housing, federal buildings, things like permanent settled structures have begun to change and have really changed the face of the North and the landscape of the North. And then we get, we start with works where it's just, we get into really, we've got some permanent structures and some folks that are still, they're living in tents, and then into much more permanent infrastructure and the way that has shaped the North.
And one of my favorite discoveries that you made is this entire body of work that is in the last room. And I find it so powerful, especially in the conversations that I've been very privileged to have in different Inuit art spaces over the last 10 years. But I wonder if you could talk about these works and what they mean to you.
Yeah, the cities. So we call them imaginary cities. And I think this is probably a combination of a few things. So for starters, it's media is different access. There's different media happening. People are watching whatever shows, and people are traveling between the North and South. And so we start to see, this is such a good option, a good example. Itidlu high rises, 1976. So I'm not sure if people are recording cities that they've been to or they visited, or if there's, but the way that the land has been illustrated and the people in the land, I sort of think it's just like, are these imaginary? Well, this one maybe not so much because there's trees and we know that we're above the tree line at this point, but there's a few of them where it feels like these are imaginary, like someday cities, or what does the future of the North look like? And so these were really, I'm an alumnus of a program called Inuit Futures. And so I think a lot about Inuit futurisms and what sustainable life for Inuit in both the North and the South look like. And it's just really cool to see the way that Inuiters of a generation or two prior were also thinking about structure and thinking about possible futures or recording their ideas.
And so this is Worlds on Paper, kind of start to finish. And the second part of the exhibition, or the second exhibition really, is Dreaming Forward.
Yeah.
And that's an exhibition of contemporary drawing. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, or maybe we can start by talking about you and I taking a trip to Kinngait in May 2024.
Yeah.
And I think that allowed us both to have a real different understanding of the community and the artists who are currently living and working in Kinngait, and why that was important to show, because the drawings in the archive end in 1990. We wanted to bring it, I think you felt strongly to bring it forward. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think one thing I will preface this with is Dreaming Forward, which is just behind us here. It is not exhaustive. I would not consider this to be a survey show of everything that's happening in Kinngait right now. There's so many artists that are doing things that I did stick to a theme here that is very similar to the theme that was throughout Worlds on Paper, which is about people, it's about community, it's about structure, it's about relationships with the land. We've got a lovely domestic space inside the building there. But I think just demonstrating that this thread through of the way that a lot of what we see now that artists have been creating over the last 30 years is so connected to deeply to what artists were making over that 3-decade span in the first 30 years of Kinngait Studios, and then now what comes in the second. And now it's just like, I'm hoping it's just enough of like a teaser taste to that you're going to want to just now go and see what Kinngait artists are making nowadays, and the way that it is so related. And that's the thing. I do think a lot about intergenerationality in work, and I like to show. It's nice. It's always interesting to follow an artist as an individual and the way that their practice grows and develops throughout their artistic career. But I think it's just as important to see the way that thinking and styles change and grow from generation to generation. And the thing is too, especially in a community where like Kinngait, where there are so many, it's literally intergenerational. Like there are artists, like we've got an Annie Pootoogook drawing in Dreaming Forward that shows herself as a child with her mother, who's an Apache Pudoogook, and her grandmother, who's Pitseolak Ashoona. And these are also really iconic, legendary female artists coming out of Kinngait. It's just like this, and that was we've been thinking about that at McMichael long before I was here, and so I think just showing just a little peek into that, the way that things. That's the thing. That's the whole point of the show, is what has changed, what changes, what will stay the same, and then how are things passed from generation to generation, and using the context of a single community for greater themes that are happening across Inuit communities across the north. There's things that are very, like there's this Kinngait story. This is a story about Kinngait. I wouldn't deign to say this is Kinngait story that we've done here. This is a story about Kinngait, but it's and it's about the artists that were here, but it also, there's so much that's experienced here that is very parallel to other circumpolar communities.
We both had a kind of unique experience, I think, being in Kinngait for the first time, and being in the place, and then immediately being reminded of drawings. And I wonder if you could talk about that briefly. Or very quickly. Yeah,
that's the beautiful thing too, is if you're a lover of art from Kinngait, and then you go there, you're like, oh, this is kind of familiar to me. Artists have been, very faithful in their representations of their community, and I think it's almost like seeing Brad Pitt walk down the street. You're like, I've seen you on TV, but now you're here in real life. And it was like, that was like my meeting Brad Pitt moment. It was like, oh, like I've seen this world translated out through several decades worth of work. And now I'm seeing it like in real life, which was really, really interesting. And we were in the studio for a few days, and I think that was just such like a quiet time. I had this whole, felt very industrious. Well, I mean, I was really tired when I was going up there because I suddenly became afraid of flying, and I didn't sleep for 2 nights before we left. I got over that really quickly after 6 flights in and out of the north. But I was going to do a bunch of interviews, and I was going to, sit down with a recorder and record people's stories. And it actually turned out to be more important to just like sit quietly and draw and be a part of and talk to people without trying to catch them on tape. let organic conversations and relationships sort of come out of that. And I got really good at learning how to work the coffee machine. I had to draw in the studio next to Kenojuak Ashevak. And this was really beautiful. I grew up in an art making household. This felt really familiar to me, the rhythm of the day. So it was really, really, really important time to spend in Kinngait, and really fortunate to, we were very fortunate to have made the journey. Yeah.
And this is the drawing that you mentioned a little bit earlier.
Right here.
And something that I'm very excited about is that this has since joined the collection at McMichael. And there's been a few acquisitions here, and I just wonder if you could talk really briefly about making the acquisitions for the show, and why that's important too.
I really believe in buying from living artists. I think we always have to, honor the stories of artists from generations past, and continue to buy their work and continue to uphold their work and love it and write about it and put it on the walls. But I'm also, I think, I feel as very keenly as the daughter of an artist, and a daughter of a working artist, is how important it is to buy from artists that are alive today and honor them and really enjoy their work. And so one of the works that we purchased is this Lucy Sila that is in Dreaming Forward. And both you and I loved this. And this was at Madrona Gallery in Vancouver. And we brought it here and we put it in the show. And very quickly, this became something that we absolutely had to have. And this in particular too, I think Lucy Sila is artist in the first 10 years of her career. She's known a lot for really exciting landscapes, colorful landscapes, and birds and owls. But lately, she's also doing these very figurative slice of life works in this black ink that I've been really excited to see. We purchased this, and then we also purchased another of the tent scene that we purchased at Art Toronto from Feely Fine Arts. And I think they're just really interesting. Like she's that's the thing about getting to engage with artists and their work while you're seeing it develop in real time. It's so special to go through the archive and be able to retroactively see the way an artist's style develops over a period of many decades. But it's also really cool to get to watch it in real time. And so that's why it's been huge priority, and especially too because of the archive, and we hold it in trust. This remains West Baffin Cooperative remains the owners of the Kinngait Archive, but we do have a longstanding relationship with them, and I think it's important that we continue to build out an even more fulsome and current collection of work by artists from Kinngait. To continue to explore where this art form has gone and where the artists from this community continue to think and dream forward. So that's my take on it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, the book is not with us, but it is.
Soon.
Will be here soon, and I'm just so proud of this publication that includes photographs of all of the drawings from the Worlds on Paper show, so much of your own beautiful writing, and a really important assembly of contributions from Inuit writers at various stages in their career. And I'm so proud of you for the work that you've done in putting this book together. It is truly such an important and really special book, and I'm really excited, and I hope that everyone here will pick up a copy when it's available.
And there's also secrets, there's extra works that weren't on the walls that are in the book. So if you just can't get enough, we've got more for you.
And you and I really could talk endlessly about
Yes,
this show
we
and this project, but I just want to thank everyone for being here with us today. I also want to share that next week for Family Sunday, there is a whole program of events that's happening with storytelling and other amazing projects, and we're all just so excited to have this show and share it with you. And thank you all for being with us today, and thank you, Emily, for sharing this incredible work that you've done.
Thank you all.
I think everyone in this room feels really, really lucky to be here today. And I think we all feel also like what you've achieved, Emily, with this show is of historic consequence in Inuit art history. This is a project that will launch 1,000 ships or kayaks, perhaps, in Inuit Umiak in Inuit art history and studies. And again, you've drawn so deeply from your community all across the country to come together. You've made this about everyone's voices in your community in a really beautiful way. So I think you can see here, ladies and gentlemen, what a truly extraordinary bench strength we have in Curatorial here at the McMichael. We are so lucky to have both of you with us here as we do our work at the McMichael, and just huge kudos, Emily, and my thanks for all your extraordinary hard work.
Thank you, Sarah.
I just want to quickly add that rather by accident, we'd love to say it was totally on purpose, but we kind of realized halfway through what we'd done. The gallery right now has 3 major shows of drawing. So it's really this moment about like, what can you get up to with making a line, you know? So Worlds on Paper is our main stage show. Downstairs, you go down the ramps here, you will submerge yourself in the netherworld that is John Scott's imagination, an extraordinarily prescient and powerful artist who died a few years ago in Toronto, taught for many years at OCAD. But his vision is really, really addressing some very tough themes: nuclear threat, America's culture of violence, toxic masculinity. Need I go on, or is this just the evening news that we're talking about here? But anyway, he grew up in Windsor, looking at Detroit and thinking deeply about our neighbor to the south. And his work is prescient, powerful, and a demonstration of everything that can be achieved with the simplest of artistic materials and a great, great brain. So the other artist, so don't miss that. The other artist here is Derek Sullivan. We have a beautiful small exhibition of his works made about 30 minutes drive from here in a field where a major exhibition, a major work by Richard Serra, the American sculptor, is located in the landscape. And Derek has made a sort of a devotional practice of visiting that sculpture, which is now overgrown with brambles. Time has overtaken it. But as his way of thinking about his relationship to landscape and also to traditions in art history over the past half century, an extraordinarily intelligent, beautiful mind as well at work on the walls at the McMichael. So it's all about the hand. And please join me again in thanking these two. And thank you for being with us today.